Well, good evening, everybody. And whether it's a Western value or an Eastern value, politeness is a great value. And I'd ask you all to turn your mobile phones off so that we can concentrate on the speakers rather than on their music. We have a very distinguished panel, and I'm not going to bore you by reading out their biographies. I'm going to give each of them a one-sentence plug. Proposing the motion, we have David Aaronovitch, who is going to feature on BBC One shortly, doing the Big Blair programme, which he interviewed the Prime Minister. He's also got a book about conspiracy theories coming out, but he points out these are not related. Douglas Murray is very modestly doesn't want his books published, although he wants them published but not plugged. But he wants just to be promoted that he is the director of the new Centre for Social Cohesion, and Ibn Warraq is the author of the new Defending the West. On the other side, against the motion, we have William Dalrymple, author of The Last Rule, which I think has been translated into 25 Indian languages and many other ones. Charles Glass, author of The Northern Front about Iraq, and Tariq Ramadan, who is the author of many books, including Western Muslims and the Future of Islam. So without any more ado, I'm going to ask Ibn Warraq to propose the motion. Ibn, the floor is yours.
Good evening. Okay. Edward? Okay. The great ideas of the West, rationalism, self-criticism, the disinterested search for truth, the separation of church and state, the rule of law, equality before the law, freedom of conscience, thought and expression, human rights and liberal democracy, quite an achievement surely for any civilization, remain the best and perhaps the only means for all people, no matter what race or creed, to reach their full potential and live in freedom. That is why Western values, on which is self-evident economic, social, political, scientific, and cultural success is based, are clearly superior to any other devised by humankind. However, when these values have been adopted by other societies, similar benefits have accrued to its citizens, as in Japan and South Korea. Liberty, the second great panel in the triptych, is also an immense human idea. It is embodied in the magnificent creation of human rights. Human rights are, I believe, universal. They transcend local or ethnocentric values and confer equal dignity and value to all humanity, regardless of sex, ethnicity, sexual preferences, and religion. I also believe it is in the West that they are most respected. It is the West that has liberated women, racial minorities, religious minorities, gays and lesbians to an extent unimaginable 60 years ago. It is in the West that their rights are recognized and defended. In the West, we are free to think what we want, to read what we want, to practice our religion, to live lives of our own choosing. The notion of human rights and freedom were, I believe, there at the dawn of Western civilization, as ideals at least, and further developed during the Enlightenment, but are only now coming to fruition in the 21st century as a result of a series of supreme acts of self-criticism. Acts of self-criticism that led to greater freedom for a greater number of people. It was the West that took steps to abolish slavery. The calls for the abolition of slavery did not resonate in black Africa, where rival African tribes took black prisoners to be sold in the West. By contrast, stoning to death someone for adultery is a clear violation of the human rights of the individuals concerned. Punishments, laws concerning inheritance, and the rights of women prescribed by the Sharia Islamic law also flagrantly violate the human rights of individuals. Under Islamic law, women are not free to marry whom they wish. Homosexuals are killed, apostates are to be executed. The Quran is not a rights-respecting document. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness define succinctly the attractiveness and superiority of Western civilization. We are free in the West to choose. We have real choice to pursue our own desires. We are free to set the goals and contents of our own lives. The West is made up of individuals who are free to decide what meaning to give to their lives. In short, glory of the West is that life is an open book, while under Islam, life is a closed book. Everything has been decided for you. God and the Holy Law set limits on the possible agenda of your life. In many non-Western countries, especially Islamic ones, we are not free to read what we want. In Saudi Arabia, Muslims are not free to convert to Christianity, and Christians are not free to practice their faith. All clear violations of the Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This desire for knowledge, no matter where it leads, inherited from the Greeks, has led to another institution that is unequal or very rarely equal outside the West, the university. Here, the outside world recognizes this superiority. It comes to the West to learn not only about science is developed in the West in the last 500 years in all departments of physics, biology, and chemistry, but also of their own culture. They come to the West to learn of the Eastern civilization and languages. Easterners come to Oxford, Cambridge, or Harvard and Yale, the Sorbonne or Heidelberg, to receive their doctorates, because they confer prestige unrivaled by similar doctorates from the third world countries. A culture that gave the world the spiritual creations of the classical music of Mozart, Beethoven, Wagner and Schubert, the paintings of Michelangelo and Raphael, Da Vinci and Rembrandt, does not need lessons from societies whose idea of spirituality is a heaven peopled with female virgins for the use of men, whose idea of heaven resembles a cosmic brothel. The West has given the world rather symphony and the novel even. To paraphrase Alan Kors, instead of the rigid, inhuman caste system in India, we have unparalleled social mobility in the West. Western society is a society of ever richer, more varied, more productive, more self-defined, and more satisfying lives. It is a society of boundless private charity. It is a society that broke, on behalf of merit, the seemingly eternal chains of station by birth. The West has given us the liberal miracle of individual rights, individual responsibility, merit, and human satisfaction. In contrast to the mind-numbing certainties and rules of Islam, Western civilization offers what Russell once called liberating doubt, which leads to the methodological principles of scientific skepticism. Politics, as much as science, proceeds by tentative steps of trial and error, open discussion, criticism, and self-correction. One could characterize the difference between the West and the rest as a difference in epistemological principles. Western institutions such as universities, research institutes, and libraries are, at least ideally, independent academies which enshrine these epistemological norms and where the pursuit of truth is conducted in a spirit of disinterested inquiry free from political pressures. In other words, behind the success of modern Western societies with their science and technology and their open institution lies a distinct way of looking at the world, interpreting it, and the recognition and rectifying of the problems besetting them. Problems are lifted out of the religious sphere and treated as empirical problems whose solutions lie in rational procedures open to rational intersubjective criticism, not in an appeal to revelation. The whole edifice of modern science and its methodology is one of the great Western man's greatest gifts to the world. But the West did not only give us just about every scientific discovery for the last 500 years, from electricity to computers, but gave us, thanks to its humanitarian impulses, the Red Cross, Doctors Without Frontiers or Borders, Human Rights Watch, the Amnesty International. It is the West that provides the bulk of the aid to beleaguered Darfur. Islamic countries are conspicuous by their absence. The West does not need lectures on the superior virtue of societies in which women are kept in subjection, endure genital mutilation, are stoned to death for alleged adultery, have acid thrown on their faces, are married off against their will at the age of 9, or where the human rights of those considered to belong to lower castes are denied. The West does not need sanctimonious homilies from societies that cannot provide clean drinking water for its citizens, that cannot provide sewage systems, that cannot educate its citizens, leaving 40 to 50% illiterate, that makes no provisions for the handicapped, from societies that have no sense of the common good, civic duty, civic responsibility, and civic accountability, from societies that are riddled with corruption. Moreover, the rest of the world recognizes the superiority of the West. It is to the West that millions of refugees from theocratic or totalitarian regimes flee, appreciating the West's tolerance and political freedom. Millions risk their lives trying to get to the West, not to Saudi Arabia or Iran or Pakistan. Second, no Western politician would be able to get away with the kind of racist remarks made by Mahathir, the Malaysian leader. No Western politician could survive in office. There would be calls for his or her resignation from third world leaders themselves, but also from Western media and other intellectuals. Yet we tolerate Mahathir's anti-Semitic diatribes. Double standards? Yes, but also a tacit acknowledgement that we expect higher ethical standards from the West. There are no jokes in Islam, as Khomeini once famously said. The West is able to look at its foibles and laugh, to make fun of its fundamental principles, but there is no equivalent as yet of Monty Python's Life of Brian. Can we look forward to the life of Mo, or half a Mo? Finally, when Chinese students cried and died for democracy in Tiananmen Square, they brought with them not representations of Confucius or Buddha, but a model of the Statue of Liberty. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Ibn Warraq, for that, both for your eloquence and for your spectacular punctuality. You stopped on the second of your allotted 9 minutes, and I commend this practice to the other speakers. Charles, over to you.
After listening to that, I'm very glad to be a Westerner. Like George Nathaniel Curzon, I feel I am a very superior person as a result. And I assume that all of you who look to be mostly Western feel quite superior as well. And aren't we jolly lucky to be Western and so superior to those awful non-Western, Southern and Eastern people? Not just Muslims, but all of the deprived people who cannot share our values, who are not fortunate enough to have shared our values. And yet we have had a history of trying to share our values with them, which goes back a long way, not merely to the Crusades, but did everyone miss what I said before? It was brilliant. Because I am a Westerner, I'm very superior. Now, when Ferdinand Magellan arrived at Madras, beginning one of the first demonstrations of the robust assertion of Western values, he ordered the people of Madras immediately, on pain of being destroyed, to expel the Muslims and the Jews from the city. And the elders, who were Hindus, Muslims, and Jews, were rather puzzled by this because it had never occurred to them to expel the Muslims and the Jews from any city. They had never done it. Magellan gave them a warning and said when they came back a year later, if they didn't do it, the place would be destroyed. And indeed, he came back a year later, and they did destroy the city. And when they went in and they expelled and killed all of the Muslims and the Jews, they discovered that there was an ancient Christian sect there of Syriac Christians who had been converted to Christianity by St. Thomas the Apostle, a much older church than the Church of Portugal and Spain. They killed them too. They tried them at the Inquisition for heresy and killed them as well. So when we speak of our values, we don't just assert that our values are better, we ram them down the throats of the rest of the world. Now, in this discussion tonight, no one on our side is going to say that Eastern or Southern or whatever is a non-Western value is superior. We're merely calling upon you to think carefully what you mean when you say that your values or your race or your culture is superior to all others, not just Islam, but to all others in the world. We know what that leads to. And a culture, if there is such a thing as a cohesive Western culture, which gave the 20th century 2 world wars, in which nearly 100 million people died, in which 6 million people were sent to death camps, by the Germans and many more by the Russians. A culture which can do that really must be superior if it can point a finger at others and claim its moral superiority. And in the aftermath of that, the colonial wars that it fought, the French fought in Vietnam or killed 2 million people in Algeria, or the British, who let 100,000 people die in Kenyan concentration camps, can point their finger. or the Americans who killed 2 million Vietnamese between 1963 and 1972 can point their finger at the Vietnamese and claim moral superiority. Or those of us now, I'm a citizen of the United States, and by the way, I was born in California, much further west than any of you, so I must be even more superior. The CIA, even today, torturing people at Abu Ghraib, at Bagram Air Base in Afghanistan, in Guantanamo, and in a number of undisclosed locations around the world, people taken away from their families and held and tortured for years on end. We are we have very superior values, and we have every right to assert those values in torture chambers, or in the helicopters from which we threw Viet Cong infrastructure, which meant you were a relation, possibly, of a Viet Cong member, from the helicopters into the South China Sea. Yes, we are very, very superior. When one asserts this notion, this ludicrous notion of racial or cultural or value superiority, one is really denying all of the cross-cultural wealth of our human legacy. We would throw out half of the poetry of Goethe, who was inspired by the Persian poet Hafiz. And then we would, not that anyone here would read Iqbal, but Iqbal, who was inspired by Goethe and wrote poems in honor of Goethe. This is a cross-culture, what Goethe himself called the East-West Diwan, where we could all sit together and exchange our cultures and exchange our values and exchange our ideas. If you go into that table to sit down to dinner with another man or another woman and say, I am superior, you don't have a dialogue. You replace discourse with discord. You replace jaw with war. You don't have a chance of enriching even yourself. And if you assert that superiority, you're basically abandoning any hope of being even an equal. So I would call on you to bear this in mind when you're conscientiously casting your vote as good, superior Western people. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Charles. The contributions are getting shorter and shorter. I'm not sure this is going to turn into a trend, but we'll see. David Aaronovitch, you have 9 minutes if you choose to take it.
They were getting shorter. But I'm sure nobody will mind, least of all Charles, if I take up his extra minute that he laid down and so on. No, maybe not. I mean, first can I say that this is easily the most distinguished set of opponents I've ever had in a debate of this kind, and I have debated against Boris Johnson. So, distinguished writers, distinguished journalists, and a distinguished professor, and all of whom I consider to be people who are people who one can have a dialogue with, a discourse with, and not in any sense enemies. But of course, when kind of considering how this debate was likely to go, I did think that however wonderful they were, the first thing we'd attempt to do would be to throw a kind of fog of obscurantism over the course of this debate, because actually we know what this discussion is really about. It's not about whether or not we think Western people are superior to Eastern people. It's not about race. It's not about literature. It is about cultural relativism. That's what this discussion is essentially about. Western values, as we understand them, not just practiced in the West, practiced in a large number of places, but usually called Western values, are precisely the ones that Ibn Warraq laid out. And we know what they are. They are liberal democracy. They are a culture of human rights. They are, and this is very important, freedom of expression. They are freedom of worship. And they are secular government as a consequence of those previous things. They are freedoms to, and they are freedoms from. The fact that the West may often fall short of its own ideals, of its own values, if you like, is testified in the very fact that something like Abu Ghraib, which was mentioned there by Charles, is regarded by us as a blot on our name rather than as a matter of good policy by the government that implemented it, as it would have been by the government of Saddam Hussein, who had Abu Ghraib before the Americans got there. Yeah. This is an important distinction, even if it feels less so, possibly, to the person who's actually at the end of the torture. I completely accept that. Now, I agree, obviously, that Western values, as I've just outlined them, can be practiced in many countries. They're practiced, for instance, in the liberal democracy in India. In Japan, as a consequence largely of the constitution imposed upon the Japanese but accepted by them by the United States after the end of the Second World War. It's practiced in South Korea, it's practiced in many places in Southeast Asia now. It is increasingly practiced around the world, increasingly because it is very much more prevalent than it was. So I want to look at one place, just for the moment, at which we can see, if you like, what a different set of cultural standards can lead you to, and that is the Islamic Republic of Iran. On the 15th of August 2004, a 16-year-old girl called Atefe Sahala was hanged in a public square in the Iranian city of Neka, and her death sentence was imposed, and this is the quote, for crimes against chastity. Her father was a drug addict. Her mother had died when she was 4. She had been arrested by the police for attending a party and for being alone in a car with a boy. She received her first sentence for crimes against chastity when she was just 13, which also involved getting 100 lashes while in prison. She then, she says, was raped by a former Revolutionary Guard who was 51. When she was tried for this and found guilty, he was found guilty too. He was sentenced to 95 lashes, and she was hanged. She was hanged. The man who put the noose around her neck was the judge who had sentenced her in the first place. Mariam Ayubi, in her early 30s, around about the same time, was put to death at dawn in Tehran's Evin prison. She was washed, wrapped in a white shroud, carried on a stretcher to an open space. There, she was placed in a hole, and earth was compacted around her, and so on, and she was stoned to death, not for the murder of her husband, which she was found guilty for with somebody else, but for the crime of adultery. In May of that same year, a woman who had been waiting on death row for 8 years was stoned for corruption on earth. She'd been found guilty of taking part in a pornographic film, and her execution at that point was the first stoning for several years. And just in case you think the practice has died out, in July this year, the Iranian government confirmed that a man was executed by stoning in a small village near Takistan. The villagers said the sentence was carried out by the local judge and authorities. At the same time, it confirmed that 20 other men were to be given capital punishment for crimes ranging from adultery to immoral behaviour to crimes against religion to sodomy, which is almost certainly a euphemism for homosexuality, which is odd, because we now know from President Ahmadinejad in his visit to Columbia University that there are no homosexuals in Iran. In the law of the Islamic Republic of Iraq, the father, in a case where people split up, automatically, without appeal, gets custody of a boy over 2 years or of a girl over 7. In the court of law, 2 women witnesses are the equal of 1 male. And I could go on and so on. This is not some kind of loose notion of how things should be done. It's not some arbitrary, it's not an Abu Ghraib, it's not some kind of strange move away from the jurisdiction, from the jurisprudential aspects of what Iran does. That's their policy. Now, the reason why, you may say, okay, this is an extreme example, one of the most extreme examples, and that's where I want to take you to the agony, what I consider to be the agony of Professor Tariq Ramadan here, who I consider to be a good man, a very good man. In a debate in 2003 with the now President Nicolas Sarkozy, Tariq Ramadan was waylaid by Sarkozy's debating style. He's not a bad debater, Sarkozy, and he was effectively ambushed. And he was asked what he thought about the practice of stoning. And you replied, Tariq, that you favoured a moratorium on such practices, but you refused to condemn the law outright. Sarkozy said, I quote, a moratorium, that is to say we should for a while hold back from stoning women? And you said, no, wait. What does a moratorium mean? A moratorium would mean that we absolutely end the application of all of those penalties in order to have a true debate. And my position is that if we arrive at a consensus among Muslims, it will necessarily end. But you cannot, when you're in a community, today on television, I can please the French people who are watching by saying, my own position, but my own position doesn't count. What matters is to bring about an evolution in Muslim mentalities, Mr. Sarkozy. And Sarkozy, you can imagine kind of getting off on this, that's monstrous to stone a woman because she's an adulterer. It's necessary to condemn it. And you said, Tariq, Mr. Sarkozy, listen to what I'm saying. When I say my own position is the law's not applicable, that's clear. But today, I speak to Muslims around the world, and I take part, even in the United States, in the Muslim world. You should have a pedagogical posture that makes people discuss things. You can decide all by yourself to be a progressive in the communities. That's too easy. Today, my position is that to say we should... my position is that is to say we should stop. Tariq, what were you saying? What were you saying? I think you were saying that you would lose your audience if you told them that stoning was wrong, that they would somehow be detached from you if you were to say to them outright, look, folks, stoning women is wrong. It is a value I cannot uphold. It is one that I totally and absolutely abhor. It cannot exist in a civilized society. But you could not say that to them because that could not be part of your discourse. You then went to say, Ian Baruma, the author, when he interviewed you on the subject, but when you want to be heard in Muslim countries, he said, when you're addressing religious issues, you can't just say it has to stop. I think it has to stop, but you have to discuss it within the religious context. There are texts involved. I'm not just talking to Muslims in Europe, but addressing the implementation of hudud everywhere in Indonesia, Pakistan, and the Middle East. That is precisely the point, Tariq. Now, are women to enjoy rights equal to those... Are women to enjoy rights equal to those of men? Are adults to decide which other adults they have sex with, or is that a cultural tick? And my final point is this. My father was a member of the Communist Party, and he believed for a while that Stalin was indeed a mighty man. And there were around at that time many people who would say that the West was in some way inferior or not superior. The values of the West America were not superior to those properly understood in the Soviet Union if you only just understood the context. You have to learn, I think, Tariq. Your father was very close to Hassan al-Banna and so on, the Muslim Brotherhood. You have to learn at some point to say, no, actually, I'm not going along with that anymore. These values of human rights, these values of liberty and so on are superior, and I will support them.
Over to you, Tariq.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I was not expecting such a comment on some of the things I said, but I will maybe come to this at the end. To start with something which is really scary sometimes in the way we ask the question or we put some motion. The superiority of our values. And to assert them. I think that from the very beginning, to put the thing like this, it's to stop the dialogue and to stop the dialogue with all the other world. It's not understandable, it's not acceptable, in fact, even to speak like this. But even the arrogant dimension of such a statement is in fact coming from very deep. It's exactly the opposite. It's because we are scared that we come with such a statement. We are scared of what is happening now, that we are losing something of our identity. All these immigrants are in Europe. They are all just threatening the identity of Europe, and then we reduce the past. We assert a new we, which is a closed we. Our world is under siege, and we try to say this is what we have to assert. And I think that coming from here, it's this closed word of reference. Who is this we are talking about? I'm a Western Muslim. I am in or out? Where do you put me? When I'm saying I'm a European Muslim, I'm within the Western values or still an outsider, insider? Which is exactly what is happening today as if, and all implicitly in your talk is, Islam is the problem. So the point here for me is this perception of two closed worlds is completely wrong. It's historically wrong, it's scientifically wrong. What are these values that are Western values? When you come to speak about freedom or rationality or doubt, I'm sorry to tell you, you have to revise the books. Because even Descartes, coming with the central notion of doubt, was connected to Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, 12th century. 12th century, it's a big name, we don't know about it. The only one we know coming from them, which is like us, is Averroes. He's a rationalist as we are rationalists. But all the people coming from the other side of the cultures and civilizations, it's as if we ignore them. Reduce the past and we become Judeo-Christian civilization, or as the Pope put it, a Greek Christian tradition or civilization. Completely wrong. Completely wrong, out of the picture. One of my great teachers as to the way we are reforming all the legal legacy in the Islamic tradition is a Shatibi, 14th century. a European, born in Europe. Who knows about him? It's as if it's nothing. So we select the past to build a new we, because we want to oppose the others. So I don't know universal values that are specifically Western values. I know shared, common, universal values coming from different traditions, and then we can share. So let us come to this and have something which is an historical knowledge to learn a bit the meaning of humility. Humility. We don't get it all. Nothing is only coming from the West, and even Christianity and other religions, and the Jewish tradition is not coming from the West, by the way. So this is a point which is quite important, and it has nothing to do with cultural relativism. The second point, which is problematic for me, is that it's very easy to look at our ideals and just to point out the failures of the other. So the reality of the others compared to our ideals. I find exactly the same in the Islamic majority countries. The great Islamic ideals, and look what they are doing in the West. And I come here and I see exactly the same. Our great values, freedom, respect, and look at them the way they are doing. Even in what you did right now in front of us. It's to say, when it comes to Abu Ghraib, we are all against it. But when it comes to Iran, this is symbolizing Islam. It's as if I was for this. I'm not. I'm sorry, and the great majority of Muslims are not. So we are coming with something which is, when it comes to the other civilization, anecdotism. We find a story, look, this is the way they are acting, and from one story we make a civilization. Unfair, unjust, dangerous. Dangerous, very dangerous. It's the starting point of any kind of racism, and even sometimes fascism. Because we come from one story. Anecdotism is very dangerous, and I think that we have to be very, 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 very aware of this kind of tendencies in anecdotes. Or we come with someone coming from the other civilization, and he says or she says exactly what we want them to say. So, if he is a Muslim, or she is a Muslim, or he is an Indian, or she is an Indian, saying exactly what we are thinking, we have a point. It's easy always to find people thinking like you want them to think, because they know which kind of recognition they could get in your civilization. They are not representing. So let us have a true dialogue, a critical, deep dialogue, but based on a comprehensive approach. Ideals with ideals, realities with realities, because it's very easy for me to go to any Muslim countries and to show them how the Western values are misused and instrumentalized by the Western countries, killing people. And today, 53% of the Americans saying torture could be understandable. Which kind of world are we promoting if these are the superiority of our values? 53% of the Americans. So I can say, look, if this is the reality, there is no superiority in this. The last point here, for me, it's also the duty of consistency. At the end of the day, the only thing which is important for me is not to come with the superiority of the Islamic values against the superiority of the Western values. The real debate here is to be consistent. Yes, we have shared common universal values. The point is today that we are all betraying our countries, our governments, and ourselves, betraying these values in our daily life. And the only point is to promote something which is not to claim the superiority of our values, but a consistency towards these values, and to be able to be self-critical. So the point is, be self-critical with the Western values, and be self-critical with the Islamic values in the way they are implemented, in the way they are betrayed. So the very point for me in the dialogue is not to come with the superiority of the values that we have, and on the ground we are just, look, I'm sorry. We speak about freedom, we speak about welcoming people, human rights. I'm a European. I'm ashamed by the way we are treating the immigrants in our continent. I'm sorry to tell you, I'm ashamed. This is not the way I think human dignity should be promoted, when we are criminalizing them and putting them in jail with no reason else that they are leaving their country. So we go there to take the wealth, and we don't want them here. While we all know that in the coming generation we need 20 million workers. Which kind of contradictions are we accepting? So we can look at our own contradiction, and I would say exactly the same in the Islamic majority countries. And here I will end with this. I don't think that debate on values, common values, is in fact really helping us to get to a deep dialogue. I think that maybe upstream from the values, we all need something which is the 3 dimensions of living together. To get a sense of humility, because we don't get it all. There is no exclusive world. We are all sharing values coming from different traditions. A sense of humility as for ourselves. A sense of respect for the world of the other, the expectation and the hopes. Respect towards the other. And self-criticism and consistency. These 3 attitudes are helping and could help us to come to a better understanding. And this is why, and let me say this. When, for example, Amnesty International in the States is asking, as today I was called a few months ago by the Italian government, asking for an international moratorium on death penalty. You accept it. You know why you accept it? Because you know that if you go straight towards abolition, it's not going to be heard. You know what it means to be pedagogical in the way to change the mentalities. You understand this, and all of us, we understand that Amnesty International in some American states is asking today for a moratorium because they know that it's not going to be followed. My point is that I said that I am against this implementation, but I am working with a world where I respect the people and I want them to change the mentality from within. While I want us to talk, I want everything to stop. Not only, by the way, stoning, because you are reducing what I said. I'm speaking about death penalty, stoning, and corporal punishment. My position is stronger than yours, because you are sitting here, you're not going to change. And maybe tomorrow you can go to Saudi Arabia. You know what? I can't go. I pay the price of being from where I am and helping the mentalities to change. Let also understand that from your arrogant position, you are not understanding, decentering yourself from your own position and waiting the people to follow you, while you may have also to follow the mentalities, and it takes time. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Professor Ramadan. And now our final 2 speakers from the panel. First of all, Douglas Murray.
Thank you. I should assume some of that applause was for me as I got up. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Ibn Warraq has pretty much laid it out already. As far as I can see, he's said everything that I would have wanted to say about Western values, what they are. He's defined them. There isn't, I believe, much challenge from the panel so far, or I suspect from the room, about those values. The only thing I can see that might hold up some people in the audience from voting on the right side tonight, if I may. Certain of the words in the motion, we say that we shouldn't be reluctant. We should be, to assert the superiority of our values. Superiority is, I think, the troubling word we've all got here, and a couple of my predecessors have already mentioned this. You don't have to go very far in Britain, or the West in general at the moment, to find people's unwillingness to assert the superiority of their values. But they know the superiority of their values because they live with the superiority of their values. I talk at a lot of campuses, and I was at one last night in London where a student got up and started protesting because I had said that an Islamist government was of itself a bad thing, which I think it is. I just said to this student, and it's not a hard question you'd have thought to ask, I just said, well, name me one Islamist government state that you would want to live in. And this is a serious question, ladies and gentlemen. It is also a personal question, and one which, if people were honest, they would admit is personal. As a gay man, there's not a country that's run by Muslims which I could live in. One of my best friends is in hiding again tonight, Dayan Hassi Ali, because of what she says, and she'd be killed if she went to any Muslim country. And I think that matters. And I think the way in which this affects our personal lives does matter, and we should not ignore it. We have the great blessing of living under this system. And we take it for granted, and we spit on it, and we can because we're living in that freedom. But I beg you, ladies and gentlemen, not to pretend that that means that we shouldn't assert the superiority of that system, because that is what it is. It is a superior system. It doesn't, I would stress this, it doesn't have to be violently asserted. Rights and values are not asserted by violence. They are asserted by showing people your rights. They are shown by example. If you do not speak up for your rights, if you do not say that you think that the rights that you enjoy should not be enjoyed by other people, or people with darker skin, or people in other countries, then I submit that you make a great error of judgment. Mr. Glass treated us to a textbook example of Western masochism. And I know some people in the hall enjoy that, because some people laughed and clapped when he cited Western civilization and epitomized it by what? World War, Nazism, Abu Ghraib, Guantanamo. Ladies and gentlemen, if you believe that the West should be treated and regarded only as something which is treated by its lowest moments, and believe that all other cultures and all other civilizations should be treated only by their highest moments, you're already putting in an unequal challenge here. Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo, I need hardly go without saying, ladies and gentlemen, were not representative of me, were not representative of the West. And the great difference that can't be reiterated enough, the great difference is that Lindy England is in prison. She is in prison and did not speak for the West. She was imprisoned and found guilty in the West, by the West, for the West. That matters, ladies and gentlemen, and it can't be stressed enough. Mr. Aaronovitch has already done this. But in Iran, when a couple were shot the other week for holding hands when not being married, the courts congratulated them. Ladies and gentlemen, it does not need you to want to assert your morals violently, to say that that stinks and we will not be a part of it. Mr. Ramadan then went on, and I think this is an important thing to talk about, to immigrants. He did exactly the same thing that Mr. Glass did. He treated us as a society as if we were a society that just abuses immigrants, that imprisons them, locks them up. I don't know where he gets that from. I see immigrants all across our streets, many of whom are doing very well. Most people in Britain have welcomed them. There hasn't been mass violence against these immigrants. By and large, they have been welcomed. How does that happen? How would the reverse happen in Saudi Arabia? How would the reverse of that happen in any Islamic culture? Why is it that every Jew in the Middle East has had to go to Israel? Why is it that we have made the de facto agreement that if there is to be a Palestinian state, it has to be Judenrein, clear of Jews? Because we treat them by a different standard, ladies and gentlemen, and we know it, and we will not do what we need to do, which is to say this is what works for us, and this is, we believe, what could work for other people. Mr. Ramadan said that we need dialogue. I agree. Everyone agrees we need dialogue. But where does it start? Would it start, for instance, with making a joke, contra Mr. Khomeini, not a very funny man? Or would it start with an article, perhaps? Would it start, perhaps, with a film? It did, a few years ago, with Submission, and Theo van Gogh was killed. Could it start with making a joke, perhaps? A joke in a cartoon? Well, apparently not. Because we know that there were burnings and killings and lootings and riotings across the globe in reaction to those cartoons. If you're going to start a dialogue, what could you do that would be smaller than drawing a cartoon? If anyone has an idea, please let me know. But this dialogue, which we keep on being offered, is not reciprocated. And we can have the dialogue here in the West tonight. But how many of the countries that will be talked about by the other side could we have the same dialogue in? We get to discuss our failings because we are in the West. We get to analyze our failures because we are here, and I think that matters. I would like to finally pick up on 2 points. Firstly, the idea, and it was misrepresented by Mr. Glass straight away, and I hope you noticed it, and I hope you registered it, that Western values were being used by our side, my side of the hall, as being something which we were keeping for ourselves. Mr. Ibn Warraq did not make that statement, and nobody on our side has. We are saying that the values which people call Western are universal. That doesn't mean secularizing people. It doesn't mean making everyone else believe in your gods or in your favorite fashion item or your favorite pop star or your favorite type of food. But it does mean that the rights which the West has nurtured and brought up exclusively, the West has nurtured and brought up, should be and can be extended to other people. And I deeply resent the notion that that was misrepresented in that way, as if we were making some kind of racial exclusive claim. Our side is not. Finally, if we do not assert our values, ladies and gentlemen, who will? Who will assert them across the Muslim world? Who are the reformers in the Muslim world going to look to when they want to see and desperately need separation of church and state? If we do not say, if we do not assert and state that we believe that is the best way to live, who is going to do it in the Muslim world? Who is going to feel emboldened to do it? And Urshid Manji said a few weeks ago when she was in London, said this: if you give up on us, if you give up on yourselves, people like me are dead. And ladies and gentlemen, I think we should take that call seriously. To assert the superiority of Western values is to state the obvious. It's to have faith in ourselves, and it's to have faith in other people. Thank you.
I know Charles Glass is itching to respond to that, and there's lots of people in the audience who want to get their oar in first, but the denouement from the other side is William Dalrymple. Over to you.
A short distance from where I live in Delhi lie the ruins of the city of Fatehpur Sikri. Fatehpur Sikri was built by the Emperor Akbar in the early 16th century. And there he called together representatives of Sunni, Shia and Sufi Islam, Hindus from Vaishnavite and Shaivite and atheistic positions, Jains, Jews from Cochin, Buddhists from the Himalayas, Zoroastrians from Gujarat, brought them together to discuss where they differed and where these different religions could come together and live together. Muslims are not usually thought of in the West as standard bearers of freedom of thought. But Akbar insisted that no man should be interfered with on account of religion, and anyone should be allowed to go over to any religion that pleases him. He argued for the pursuit of reason rather than the reliance on the marshy land of tradition. Now, all this, of course, took place while in this city, a short distance from where we're now standing, Jesuits were having their entrails pulled out. They were being hung, drawn and quartered. In Spain, the Spanish Inquisition was torturing anyone who disagreed with the ideas of the Catholic Church. In Rome, Giordano Bruno was being burnt at the stake in Campo de' Fiori. Now, I think it's well worth emphasizing Akbar, for he, the greatest ruler in the most populous Muslim state ever, the Mughal Empire, represented so many of the values which the opposition is claiming as exclusively Western. I think this is particularly so of neocons like Douglas, who wrote in The Spectator this week of Western values being rule of law, parliamentary democracy, equality, freedom of expression and conscience. But where did these ideas come from? Judeo-Christianity, as we've already heard, obviously is not a Western set of ethics. Jesus was not born in London, however much the Victorians like to believe that God was an Englishman. The Council of Nicaea, where the creed was thrashed out, had more bishops from Persia and India than from Western Europe. Judaism and Christianity are Eastern religions. Simple. Where did the first law code get written? By Hammurabi in ancient Iraq. The idea of reason being having a primacy in the West. Well, think about Adelaide of Bath in the 12th century, coming back from his scientific studies in Syria and disputing with his French-educated nephew. I was taught by my Arab masters to be led only by reason, he said, whereas you are taught to follow the halter of ancient authority. Who was the first ruler to emphasize equality? Akbar in the 3rd century BC, who laid down in stone basic principles for the freedoms of all his people and did not exclude women and slaves as Aristotle did. Yet figures such as Akbar and Ashoka are not taught in our syllabuses. So it is possible for us in this room today to believe that these ideas are Western values. In truth, I do not believe there is such a thing as a Western value. Do I have the same values as a Midwestern evangelical or a Serbian warlord or a Liverpudlian football thug? Does the Dalai Lama share the same values as Osama bin Laden? This idea that there are Eastern and Western values is simple nonsense. Utter nonsense. To cherry-pick your favourite values, as the opposition have done, and to call them Western, and then simply to imply that their opposites are somehow Eastern, is simply bigoted, silly, as well as unhistorical. The great historian of the Crusades, Stephen Runciman, knew better. Our civilization, he wrote at the end of his great 3-volume history, has grown out of the long sequence and interaction and fusion between Occident and Orient. The best in both Eastern and Western civilization comes not from asserting our values, but in humbly learning from our mistakes and from others. The ability to learn from the past of the mistakes of the past is not the same as moral relativism. If we are wary of asserting Western values today, it's not because we are moral relativists, it's because we know the worst excesses of colonialism, the millions of deaths which took place due to secular Western ideologies, such as Marxism, fascism, and most of all, Nazism. These movements are not freak departures from form, so much as the most terrible expressions of the darkest side of Western civilizations, our long traditions of anti-Semitism and genocide of non-Western Untermenschen. Just go through the peoples we have wiped out, the Tasmanian Aborigines, the Incas, the Aztecs, the Apaches. Think of the Belgians in the Congo. Think of the Caribs in the Caribbean. Think of the hundreds of thousands put to death by the British after the Indian Mutiny. Think finally of the Holocaust, 6 million dead. It is this tradition of colonial genocide that prepared the way for the Holocaust. For all our achievements in creating wealth and emancipating women and slaves, all the wonderful things that Ibn Warraq talked about, our social freedoms and human rights, for all our generous involvement in international aid projects, our sense of superiority, our continuing tradition of arrogantly asserting this perceived superiority has consistently led to all that is most shameful in Western history. Remember that this debate is not about whether Islam is superior to Christianity, nor is it about whether Western or Eastern civilizations are somehow better, nor is it whether New York is more fun to live in than Riyadh. There is no question that at this point in history, the West has the most rich, productive, and powerful society on earth. But remember, the same could have been said historically about India and China, and it will be so again in our lifetime. By 2040, the economies of both those countries will overtake that of America. Instead, the motion we have come to debate tonight is whether we should be reluctant to assert the superiority of the West. In other words, should we be frightened of this Western tradition of self-assertion? You need to perorate now. Of our long tradition of telling other people that we are the best, how much better we are, of forcing our cultures on others. The key words here are afraid and assert. And I would argue that yes, we should indeed be deeply afraid of this Western conceit and arrogance and see in it the Achilles heel of Western civilization. To be afraid of Western assertion is not moral relativism. It is about humbly learning from historical experience, about having a sense of humility and history. I urge you to oppose the motion, to show the neocons and the neo-lefties where to go with their dangerous and ignorant ideas. We have much to be proud of in the West, but I believe it is in the arrogant and forceful assertion of the superiority of Western values that we have consistently undermined all that is most precious in our civilization. Thank you.
Well, I'm sure you're dying to get your points and questions in, but just for that, I have the result of the preliminary vote, which was taken before you heard those 6 excellent speeches. A little bit of maths shows that there are 741 people who cast their voting slips, and before the debate, For the motion, broadly speaking, in favour of Western values and their promotion, 313. Against, 221. And don't know, 207. Now, whichever way that goes, I'm sure it'll be different at the end. So the rule now is that I'm going to ask to take questions from the floor, and if it's a very pointed one, I may give it straight to the panel, or otherwise I may take a bunch together. I see a gentleman at the back with his hand there. I'll try and give roughly equal shares to the balcony and to the main auditorium. So if those in the balcony wanted to get close to the microphone up there, and if you can give the gentleman at the back there, in the second row from the back, you can go first. And do try and catch my eye, and I shall send microphones round. There's a gentleman, you can bring the microphone there to the gentleman in the front row there for next. You go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I have sympathy with both sides of the debate tonight, but I think David Aaronovitch really hit the nail on the head when he said that this debate is about relativism. It's not about Western values versus what goes on in Iran. And I'd like to hear a lot less about what goes on in Iran, about stoning and such. I think that the question of where we question our own values, that didn't come from Iran. You know, relativism is an idea that was developed in our own universities, in our own thinkers. We're questioning our own values. We're losing faith in ourselves. And we should be asking, why are we doing that? Not comparing ourselves to the worst excesses and the most barbaric governments around the world, because that's a silly comparison. Of course, we're better than people that stone, or the values that we have are better than stoning gays. But why are we questioning ourselves?
Thank you. Then we have the gentleman in the there. He's got his hand up in the front row of the middle tier of seats there, and then I'll take a couple of questions in the auditorium, starting with the lady at the front there. Go ahead, sir.
The opposers of the motion keep giving us history lessons. It seems to me the key word in this proposition is we. We're not talking about my great-grandfather or my great-grandchildren. It's what should we, the beginning of the 21st century, be doing. And what we should be doing is comparing the values we have now against the values other people have now.
Thank you. Very good. And now, I think there's someone at the front there wants to go ahead, sir.
Hello, my name is Matthew O'Connor, and I'm a student at a school just outside London. I'd like to ask the opposition, are they grateful for their unalienable right to disagree and indeed express that disagreement with their opponents, a right which many people over the ages in this country have paid with their blood to secure, and which in other countries and cultures they would be denied to them, and maybe they would even be executed for in these cultures which they purport have equal social and moral worth to our own. And if indeed they aren't grateful and aren't proud of that right, why don't they emigrate to these nations where they can share these people's honourable oppression?
I get your train of thought. The gentleman down here at the front.
I'd like to ask the proposers of the motion if you can talk about any country that's consistently advocated these values around the world instead of propping up various regimes who they do business deals and everything else with. Does the West ever practice any of these values that you talk about?
Okay, and I'd urge you that the more applause, the less time for questions. So you can all applaud at the end. I'll take one more question from the balcony if there's someone there. No, there wasn't. Then perhaps we'd have the... Sorry? Someone was... Yeah, go ahead. You over there then. Yes. Someone's shy. No? You've got the microphone? And I'm going to come back to the panel. I can't see where the microphone's got to. Sir, go ahead, yes.
I would assert right now that, as the distinguished members on the right stated, that things like World War II and other shameful episodes in the history are aberrations. Maybe by the same standard, what is going on right now in the Arab world is also an aberration, and that any living human being would want all the liberty and dignity that comes with self-determination.
Very good. Thank you very much. Let's take a couple of responses from the panel. Who wants to go first on this side? David, you were about to blur fuse earlier, so do you want to blow it now?
I found the question about the West not practicing what it preaches on values very interesting, not least the applause. Because I wonder to myself, how should I interpret that applause? Should I interpret that applause as meaning that the West should seek to practice the implementation of its values abroad? If that is how you interpret the applause for your question, then I utterly and completely agree with it. Unfortunately, it does mean that you have to vote with the motion and not against it, doesn't it? In order to be in any way consistent. What would be the point of thinking that these values were not superior and then seeking to implement them around the world? There would be no point to it. My point is entirely that in the past, the West, as we're talking about since the Second World War, if I can bring us slightly more up to date than Magellan and the Spanish Inquisition and the Emperor Akbar and so on, all of these worthy events. The whole point about what we are seeking in this motion to defend as being superior values would, if they had been properly defended, have fended off the possibility of Nazism, the Second World War, and so on, and would probably, had we not compromised, had we not dealt with Saddam Hussein, etc., avoided us being in the position that we're in at the moment. I have a very simple question at this point to put to Tariq Ramadan. He asked for humility, Tariq, what is the humble position on women's rights and equality for women? Tell me.
Right. I'm going to... I promised to come to Charles Glass first, and then I'm going to go to Tariq straight afterwards to answer that question, then I'll come back to this side. Charles.
In response to the practice of one's values and the statement of one's values, at the moment there are wars going on all over Africa and in other places in the developing world. There are no manufactories of weapons in any of those places. The United States, Britain, France, Russia supply $30 billion a year to the developing world. We can throw in China as well. We'll throw in China as well, because it's now joined the Western Club as a major manufacturing nation, and it is supplying the wherewithal for these people to kill one another. And the United States, by the way, supported Saddam Hussein from the time he came to power until he made the mistake of invading Kuwait. And as it supported undemocratic regimes throughout the world since the end of the Second World War. So if you ask any democratic force in Syria or in an African country what help they ever got from the United States in an anti-colonial struggle or in a struggle against their dictator, they tell you basically the United States supplied the intelligence network for their governments to put them into prison and kill them.
Tariq Ramadan, there was a direct question to you. What is the humble position on women's rights?
Yes. First, I didn't say that. I said that if we want a deep dialogue and to understand in which way we can build together, 3 conditions, and humility is one of them. When it comes to women's rights, my position is quite clear, and it's here. I don't know if you want to follow what I'm saying or you are following, but you are changing the ground just to make a point where you don't know how to react on the first point of the moratorium. On the women's rights, there is no discussion. There are values and equality, and that we have to work for this. From within the Islamic world, within the Muslim communities, for years and years, I have been promoting this and say that we have to struggle against discriminations, coming from 2 main fields. The first one is a cultural reading of the scriptural sources, and the second is literalism. And to say equality, same competence, same salary, the right to decide who you want to be, autonomy, to act against domestic violence, to act against any kind of forced marriages. All this is part of the struggle. So this is why I do not accept when you essentialize Islam while taking one anecdote about a Muslim and saying this is Islam and this is the problem we have. Because we are struggling within the Muslim world to change this situation. If you don't want to listen to the people who are trying to change with a humble sense, it means that we are for the same rights, but we know that to change societies takes time. But you know where lies your humility? Is at the same time that you are asking me to reform this, is to come with me in your own society here, when you know that in this society in Britain, the women don't get the same salary for the same work, don't get the same rights, and don't at the same time, in this society, 70% of the women who are beaten by men they know. This is happening in the West. So don't take your ideal
equality for something which is for granted, and when you look at Muslims, you have to change. Change with me your own world and be self-critical. This is humility. Come to me, come with me, and we will work together.
To pick up once again on the fact that, again, Mr. Glass has said that you, ladies and gentlemen in the room, are propping up or pro-dictator regimes, that you in this room are doing deals with Saudi Arabia. Ladies and gentlemen, the West may have made and has made grotesque errors in propping up dictators in the Middle East, but we also manage not to prop them up. We've also, if you like, we have the antidote to poisons within us. Can that be said of other societies to the same extent? And please note Mr. Dalrymple's use of the word we. It was we when it was people carrying out massacres in the West, in the past, your forebears. It was only we when it's us doing bad things. When is it we expressed by Mr. Dalrymple of pride of what the West has done? That he cannot bring himself to do, and I hope you note it, ladies and gentlemen. This is masochism, and it's being offered to you by a sadist.
Right. Let's not get too psychological here. Right, now I'm going to take a bunch of questions from... Can
I reply to that?
I'll get to you next, but I want to take some more questions and I'll come back to the panel. So if all 6 people reply to every question, it gets a bit on. So you can have the microphones down here. Let's see the gentleman in the front first, and then we'll go to the lady behind with the white hat.
Yes, thank you. I think there was an error in the presentation that William Dalrymple made, because he used the word exclusive. We aren't talking about exclusively Western values here, and I think it's misrepresentation to suggest that we are. We're talking about universal values. The values that we've talked about, human rights, equality, democracy, and so on, are universal values. The difference, surely, is that they have been adopted in the West. They have not been adopted elsewhere.
Very good. Question 2 rows behind. Lady, that lady there. Yep.
This lady.
You've got 2 microphones now. You can only make 1 point.
I wanted to say I was a bit frightened when Douglas Murray suggested we mustn't be afraid to assert our superiority, because isn't one of the reasons for the Iraq war the determination to spread democracy and freedom and human rights in the Middle East? I hope we're not going to be doing too much more of that. And my second point is that everybody has spoken about the Arab world, because this somehow has turned into a kind of Arab West thing, as if there are no immigrants or refugees in the Arab world. I just want to say that Syria is host to about 3 or 4 million, I don't know the precise figure, of refugees from the Sudan, Palestine, and now mostly Iraq.
Thanks very much. Now the gentleman just back there has got his hand up, and then I'll take the lady in the purple cardigan there, and then we'll come back. Yes, don't worry, I'm going to be fair, don't worry.
I just wanted to point out 2 sort of rhetorical moves being made by those who are opposing the motion, which people should think about. First of all, much play is being made with asserting the superiority of these values. Now, asserting the superiority of certain values is no different from defending them, defending values. And that is an elementary critical exercise, unless you're just going to say all values are equal or indifferent. But if you defend some values as being better than other values, then you're asserting their superiority. There's nothing sinister whatsoever about doing that. Another move which both Charles Glass and William Dalrymple have made is to conflate asserting the superiority of certain values with forcing those values on people by military might. And that's just a confusion. I mean, it's a fundamental liberal principle that you argue for certain principles, and that's how you try to get them across, by persuasion.
Okay.
You assert their superiority. That doesn't mean you think they should be imposed on you.
I'm going to ration people to 1 point now, and please make it as briefly as possible. Lady in the purple cardigan there, please. And then I'm going to go to another part of the auditorium.
I think when we talk about Western values, what we're talking about is the values of the Enlightenment. And these values had taken some elements from cultures before them, but they're but it was the West and the values of the Enlightenment, which are not the values of the Judeo-Christian religion, because in many ways they are secular values that were even against those religions, the ones that we are defending as Western values. And when Mr. Ramadan agrees that the women have a right to their own opinions and to do what they want, he's accepting those same Enlightenment values.
So you're on the West side, whether you like it or not, but I'm going to ask William Dalrymple to reply to that and any other points he wants to make.
Well, first of all, I'd like to reply to the several questioners who mentioned the history-heavy presentations this side. I make no apology for reminding the audience in this room about Western history. I'm a historian. And I think, if we forget what we've done, so much of Western colonialism simply isn't taught in our classrooms. The history of the extinction of all these hundreds of different tribes and peoples who we have driven to extinction, we don't know about this. I particularly make no apology for mentioning the Holocaust. The Nazis were certainly not afraid of asserting the superiority of Western values.
Oh, for goodness sake.
No, it's a very serious point. With that. It's a very serious point, and they contrasted their Western and their rooted German values as they saw it. No, it is an absolutely serious and essential point.
Sorry, please don't. You can express your displeasure at the vote, but please don't heckle. But William, can you speak for Aaronovitch not to heckle? Yes.
But I think the other point is that the history of Western colonialism clearly is not over. The phrase post-colonial is dead since the cadaver of Western imperialism has emerged shuddering from its shallow grave. And I think the important point to emphasize here is that the values of the men who coordinate the rendition network that exists today, who are covertly dismantling our civil liberties, undermining international law, are as much part of Western history as the ideals of Jefferson they are undermining.
Thank you. Ibn Warraq, do you want to come back on that, and then we'll go to the floor again?
Yes, I'd like to say, in fact, Dalrymple exemplifies one of what I call the redemptive grace of Western civilization, that's self-criticism. And we often hear, we have documented, Westerners themselves have documented the crimes of the West. We talk about the Spanish Inquisition, but how many of us know about the Islamic Inquisition, known as the Minha? Okay, we talk about Western imperialism. What about Japanese imperialism? Rape of Nanking. What about Islamic imperialism, which according to Professor K.S. Lal killed 8 million people? And Dalrymple talks about Akbar as a Muslim. He was not a Muslim. In order to join his inner circle, you had to abjure the Quran. As for the Second World War and the Holocaust, it was just several million people in the West died fighting against them. They gave their lives in the name of freedom. And it was a historical contingency that at that particular moment, these people had in their hands the power to destroy vast numbers of people.
Right, now I'm going to take a bunch of questions from... I'm going to take four or five questions from up on the balcony, so please, and I can't see because these bright lights, so please cluster around the microphone if you want to say anything. Go ahead, the lady at the front.
It's very difficult for us to vote on a title which says, assert the superiority of Western values. On whom? If you said, assert them on fundamentalists, whether they're Islamist or Hindu fundamentalist, one could understand, but saying to assert those values on everybody seems a bit difficult to vote on. And my other question is for Mr. Dalrymple. Your favorite Mughal emperor, Akbar, didn't he start a religion called Deen-e-Ilahi, which had nothing to do with the Quran, because he wanted to have a milder religion that people could adapt to, having his predecessors plundered and killed millions of Hindus in India.
I think one could possibly say that the motion is to assert the superiority of Western values against people who disagree with them. That might answer your question. Next person, please.
Hi, good evening. Well done to both sides of the panel.
That's fine, but that's
where I struggle with this motion is still with several words, not to be reluctant and assert. And that's where I personally struggle with this motion. I don't necessarily want to debate superiority. I live here. What the example that I'd like to give specifically is...
a brief one, please.
is there was an article in the Washington Post several months ago about USAID sending computers to other countries and the Bush administration insisting that it be very well marked. These are computers from the United States of America, from this organization. And in fact, then, it meant that the gifts that were clearly meant as something to be very helpful were not as well received because they were coming with this assertion of this is something from the United States of America, a gift for you. So how do not be reluctant and assert? What does that mean that we in this room should actually do with those words in it?
We'll come to the panel in a moment. Is there any more questions up from the... Take one more from the balcony. And then I'm coming over to you next, don't worry. Go ahead, sir.
Okay, a question for Tariq Ramadan, really. If we take Tariq at his word that we're all sort of after much the same thing and we all sort of agree on things, although I'd like to see him say that in a predominantly Muslim audience in Iran, say, given that a lot of change is needed in lots of countries, for example, Iran and Syria, as a pragmatic measure, does he think it's a good idea to have a theocratic regime, or would he prefer to have a secular democratic regime to effect the change that we all want to get to, if we all agree that we all want to get there?
Very good. I think that's going to... Is there no more questions from the balcony? Very good. We'll go then... Tariq, do you want to answer? So one more. Yes, go ahead. Sorry. Just make it very quick, please. Right. Yes, I'm coming to you next. Just be patient.
Yes, right. I couldn't help but notice, while listening, that two of the speakers, more than any of the others, had a rather poor grasp of the English language. Which
that's not the point. So just make a very brief intervention.
Yes, I'll make a brief point. My point is merely that it was very theatrical, your use of the language, but rather feckless. And you resorted, in the case of Charles Glass, to using jaw, war, which to me sounded like naff. And I'm getting to my point. And in the case of Tariq Ramadan, you had to resort even to using Nazi language.
So we're not here to have stylistic critiques of the debating style. Can you make a point?
Right. My point is merely that more anger than analytical argument came across in your speech. And the overwhelming point for the motion was that moral relativism is not a desirable thing. I have not yet heard an argument against that point. I haven't heard anything that
perhaps you'll hear it now. Tariq Ramadan, do you want to answer that and the other points on behalf of this side? And then we're going to you, I promise.
No, there are two things. The first thing is about this moral relativism or cultural relativism that we are talking about. I think that this is not the point. When we are saying that the way to look at our values as our values, not shared by others, and then as they are ours, they are superior, or we are asserting the superiority, this is the problem. The point for me is really to say, and this is exactly the point about women. Someone who is telling me, because I'm struggling for equality, it means that I'm coming to take the Western values. It means that maybe you don't know about what is from within the religious trend or within the Islamic civilization, what are the values. It may be, and I think that this is the way, when you come back to the role of the woman in the society, and even at the beginning of the Muslim society, you will find that there were nothing like, for example, same work, not the same salary, and not the same involvement in the society. I think that you have to come also to something which is, it may be that what we are rediscovering is also something which is our own values that are also shared by the West. It's not the West who get it all. So the point here is not to say, if you say what I want you to say, it means that you are coming to my universe of reference. This is very arrogant. This is something to look at the others as if they are not here. And it means also that you don't know history, not enough. So this is one point. The second point is about so it's not about at all cultural relativism. And when it comes to secularism, for example, we are asked about this, in which way we have to deal with this. Let me say something. I'm sorry, I have to take 2 minutes just to explain this, because it's really important, it's central. I heard it 3 times, is that secularism is something which is universal. By the way, when you say Western universal values, stop, hold on. Western universal values is a contradiction in terms. Western universal value, Western or universal, or everything which is Western is universal. There is a problem here. There is a problem. So the point is, on secularism, if you speak about the concept of secularism in the Islamic civilization today, secularism has not at all the same psychological input in the Islamic countries as here. Here it meant freedom, liberty, equality. In the Islamic world, all the people, all the rulers who spoke about secularism were dictators imposing it. What I want is, yes, a separation of power, but you have to deal with the terminology, the models of the society. If you want to get a chance to have democracy in the Islamic world, don't come with one word to say this is the only universal way to be like us. No, we are for principles, rule of law, equal citizenship, accountability, universal suffrage and separation of power. These are the indisputable principles, but let the people find their model. Don't come with your model to impose it onto them.
Okay.
Professor Ramadan is doing is the reverse side of what I hear a lot of conservative right-wing politicians doing now, which is effectively we just have to give them a lot of time. You tend now to hear the thing about people needing their own reformation, Islam being 600 years younger and all this kind of thing. I recently heard exactly the same thing as Professor Ramadan was saying, uttered by Norman Lamont, Baron Lamont of Tehran. He said exactly the same thing. But they need time. Tariq Ramadan said it's going to take time. How much time, ladies and gentlemen? I don't think we have time. And I would beg Professor Ramadan to go around the Muslim world explaining to women in Saudi Arabia they can look forward to freedom in 600 years' time. And that gay people in the Muslim world can look forward to having their first meaningful relationship 6 centuries from now.
So send the troops, please. Send the troops in Saudi Arabia, not in Iraq and not in Iran. In Saudi Arabia, do it and promote that. Promote Saudi Arabia, not Iraq.
Up to the Saudi regime.
Why are you not asking the troops to go to Saudi Arabia? Because of geostrategy.
Just one moment, please. Look, everybody on the panel is going to have a chance to perorate at the end, but I do want to get some more questions in. So you have 30 seconds, David Aaronovitch, to reply to that, and then I'm going to...
I have absolutely nothing useful to say in 30 seconds, so let's go to the audience.
Very good, okay. Okay, I'm going to take a bunch of questions over there from the very patient people in the sort of far phalanx, and then I'll have one question from the front there, the gentleman in the black shirt. First of all, the gentleman there who's been very patient, had his hand up from the very beginning.
Can I? At the moment, we are just asserting opinions. Why don't we have a scientific experiment where people choose where they want to live, and then we can measure their levels of happiness?
Thank you. And then the gentleman in front, sorry, who I was pointing to before, who's had his hand up just in front of the camera. Yep.
Thanks. I was wondering whether the question should be put differently. Should we not be reluctant to assert the superiority of liberalism? I know it's a can of worms because there are many versions of liberalism, but that's what it is about. The best explanation, and it's not very popular because the person who offered it was a very unpopular Prime Minister of France, François Guizot, but he was a major historian. And in his History of Civilization in France in the late 1820s, he offered a very simple and at the same time brilliant explanation of what happened, and it is that other civilizations, other cultures historically developed long before Europe and had been much more advanced than Europe, India, China, Greece, and so on. But what happened in Western Europe since the fall of the Roman Empire is that nobody prevailed. In those other civilizations, some force prevailed, he says, and stopped progress and so on. And his explanation of what he would see as superiority, the progressiveness, was that nobody prevailed. So everybody in the West wanted to suppress everybody else. Everybody wanted to prevail and suffocate everybody else. They just didn't manage. It's a historical accident.
Right,
and it's a fortunate historical accident, but it's nothing to boast about. What one can assert the superiority of, it's liberalism.
So I'm going to say, if you want to quibble with the wording of the motion, please write a letter to John Gordon, but let's discuss it here, because this is the motion that we've got. I'll take one more question from over there, then I'm going to take one from down here, and then from over there. Okay, well, there's someone else who's been waving like mad. They put their hand down. Okay, I see.
Hi, my name is Jeremy O'Grady, and you can quibble with me as well because I'm partly responsible for framing this motion. And indeed, in the spirit of what is being passed as Western values, I'd like to confess to contributing to a certain amount of confusion this evening, because it strikes me that there are actually two propositions, not one, being debated here. The first is...
I can't shut you up. Because
no, you can't.
But I could...
You can't. You can't shut me up, and so I'm going to be very quick. The first thing is to say that Ed can't shut me up. The second is to say it would be perfectly consistent to say that Western values are superior to whichever other values we're talking about. But simultaneously, and I think this is partly Mr. Ramadan's point, it's a bad idea to assert that fact. So there are two propositions we got here. It would be perfectly consistent to say Western values are actually inferior to other values, but it's still a damn good idea to assert their superiority, and so on. The importance of this, though, has to do with the neocon argument on the other side. Assertion has proved Western values, my own belief, are superior. I don't think it's a very good idea if you want to persuade others of the fact to assert the fact.
A magnificent point, magnificently put. Another gentleman behind you who's had his hand up, and then the lady over there with the black shirt. Go ahead, sir.
Is this on? I think we're forgetting how different people are across the world. Like, if you look at just a couple people from history or now, like Nelson Mandela, Oswald Mosley, Margaret Thatcher, Karl Marx, a Liverpool football thug. You know, there's a lot of different people, and it's about being different. It's not about what's better and what's worse. People feel differently. When you're trying to fit a jigsaw puzzle together, and it's just not fitting, like in Iraq, we're trying to assert things that aren't the right place, and we're just forgetting different things are better for different people. One set of values shouldn't be asserted on everyone.
Right, okay. Now the lady over there has been amazingly patient. She's got her hand up again there. Go ahead.
I think both sides are making some excellent points, but I'm just wondering why we seem to be taking Islamic values as a proxy for all non-Western values. What about Buddhist values of non-violence, for instance?
Very good. Thank you particularly for being so brief. Now, I'm going to the people who wave most furiously will have the chance to have the final points. There's a lady there, a man there, sorry, I can't see lights and light. Someone waving, go ahead.
Thank you very much. I'm a woman with a very deep voice. I just wanted to say to William Dalrymple, Pol Pot, Genghis Khan, Chairman Mao, it's very easy to select the worst of mankind. I don't think the worst of mankind is in the West. The other point I wanted to make is I think Western values is a nice expression for stimulating all sorts of debate, but unfortunately hasn't led to a lot of precision, and I'm just crystallising some of the points that members of the audience have made. Well, I think what we're really talking about is contemporary Western values as enshrined in liberal democracy. And I think once we understand that's what we're talking about, it's very difficult to actually say that this isn't a superior notion.
Thank you. Now, the gentleman over there has got his hand up in the middle row at the back, and then the gentleman here in the front, and after that we'll stop. But go ahead. Can someone take the microphone to that gentleman who's waving there first? Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Mike Butterfield. I'm a devout skeptic. I'm sure all the members of the panel are men of goodwill, and I think the problem is, as Jefferson said, the separation of church and state. And until we form some form of godless morality where people of all religions and no religion can respect one another and respect their dignity, I think we're going to hell in a handcart. I'm just as much worried about the American creationist as I am about the militant Islamic fundamentalists, and I think we need to take great care that our liberties are not going to be dissipated. Thank you.
Douglas Murray's longing to set you right, but he's going to have to wait a moment. I'm going to take that gentleman there, and then we'll start.
Do the members of the panel think that a meeting like this could possibly be held in a Muslim country?
Right, short question, and gives a good basis for the final round. Now, we're now going to start voting. You'll be given voting slips, and you have to tear off the end that you like and put it in the box. And while that's happening, we are going to have the panel. And please, will you be quiet? You don't have to talk while you're voting. This is something you do with your fingers, not with your voices. So we're now going to go in exact reverse order. So I'm going to call, first of all, on William Dalrymple to give 1 or 2 minutes to close the case for the cause against the motion. William.
I would just like to remind voters about the motion itself. As you said, it's not about whether Islam is superior to Christianity. It's not about Eastern and Western civilization. It is about whether it is a good thing to assert Western values. The tradition that we have had for so long of telling everyone how much better we are, forcing our cultures on other. And I think the key words here are afraid and assert. And I would argue that we should indeed be deeply afraid of this Western conceit and arrogance, and see in it the Achilles heel of an otherwise remarkable Western civilization. There's so much we have achieved, and I, contrary to what Douglas was saying, I did in my speech very much celebrate our achievements in economics, in freedom, in politics, but this is the dark side, this continual ability that we have to assert our values violently and non-violently on others. And it is this, I think, that the debate centers on. It's not about Islam, as the lady said so rightly at the back. What about Buddhism? What about Confucianism? All these other systems. I think the key one has to bear in mind is, for all that we have to be proud of the West, I believe it is in the arrogant and forceful association of the superiority of Western values that we have consistently undermined all that is most precious in our civilization.
William stood up because he's very close to the lectern, but I'm going to ask everybody else to stay seated so you get more talking time that way. Unless you actually want to.
I'm happy sitting.
Very good. Okay.
Mr. Dalrymple did, however, just make an allusion there. He talked about the West's virtues. He talked about it being rich and productive. He did not focus, for instance, or even mention the fact that it is also free. I think this matters, ladies and gentlemen. He was counting the amount of money you make, not the virtues of your life or the values of your systems or the rights that you enjoy. I'm quite loath in a way to mention Iraq, but somebody just did. This is usually the moment at which I start to lose the debate. But I would, since most of you voted anyway, it doesn't matter. Iraq would indeed be a much better place if the parties of God were not killing our secular friends and allies there. And I think it's a grotesque thing to hold the West and Western values and liberty and freedom and democracy and the rule of law, blame them for religious fundamentalists blowing up our secular allies. And I hope you noticed that, ladies and gentlemen. And why we compare them with Muslim values? I agree with the lady. We could have focused on Buddhist values. We could have focused on any other types of values. The reason why it kept on coming back to it is, as you know, because this is the matter of our time. And it is not hard at the moment to notice the calls for the different type of societies that people want to create. And that there is a clear difference. And I hope, ladies and gentlemen, when you vote for the right side tonight, you make this clear. There is a difference between the Western states, which practice their own values that we sometimes mistakenly call Western values. And yes, we should call them liberal values, and yes, we should call them universal values, but we identify them with the West because they came from the West, because they were nurtured in the West, and that they are hopefully, I hope you will agree, asserted by the West and believed in by the West. We are the people that can spread this. Thank you.
Tariq Ramadan, respond to that and anything else that you like.
Yes, I will start by responding to what you said and go along with my conclusion. You were asking, would it be possible to have this kind of dialogue in an Islamic majority country? In many Islamic majority countries, it would be impossible, and mainly in the Arab Islamic countries, but don't reduce Islam to the Arab countries. It would be possible to have this kind of dialogue in Indonesia, in Senegal. There are Islamic countries, so don't essentialize. While I cannot have this dialogue in the United States of America today, I'm banned from there, mainly because I'm critical. With the support of 18 universities now, we are challenging the government, because when I went to this American embassy, I was said that my position on Iraq and on the Middle East is critical and very critical, and I was asked why I was to go there. And all was said about the money I gave 1 year before one organization was blacklisted are all bullshit. Now my name is cleared, but I cannot go there. So if I was to take the United States of America as a standard of freedom of expression, I would have a problem today. So the point here for me is not to use this. You know, I don't like the position I have tonight. because of the question I got. The question is pushing me to do something which is completely against the spirit of what we have to do today. It's not to come with our values against your values and to pretend and to have a very narrow understanding of what is happening now with no historical knowledge, with no comprehensive approach. I think that the superiority does not lie on the Western values and the Islamic values, but on the people who are just, humbly consistent with their values. Consistency is the superiority, and self-criticism. Anything else could be arrogance and dismissing the point of the other, and I don't like to be like this. I don't like it.
David Aaronovitch declined to have an extra 30 seconds earlier, so I'm going to give it to him now to add on to the 2 minutes you've got otherwise.
Right. Could we have this debate in a Muslim country? Yes. As Tariq Ramadan has said, in some of them you'd have to be very tentative, in others it wouldn't happen at all. I think it is entirely wrong that you're not allowed into the United States, Professor Ramadan. I think it's a huge mistake on their part. I'm quite willing to sign the petition that I am allowed to sign without any harassment to try and make sure that you get in to have the debate that you want, and I hope that they're consistent with their values. I think it's ridiculous. But you asked a question earlier. Incidentally, I'll take up Jeremy's point. I can see why it would be better to have a motion to say it would be, we shouldn't be so reluctant to imply the superiority or to suggest the superiority of Western values. And I would have been very happy with that. I think that part of the problem we had was the negotiation of this motion, which I think the end where we came was the one that William Dalrymple wanted, which is why he attacked it so much. Tariq Ramadan, Professor Tariq says, in or out? Am I in or out? Tariq, you're in. I'm in. We're in partially because of the values in the societies that we choose to live in. Had we been in other societies, we might not. You must begin to recognise this fact. And if what you are saying, because it's difficult to understand sometimes, is you believe in the same values as I do with regard to things like women's rights and so on, then in that case we have no problem. We can knock the Western out of any kind of title and we can agree about it and so on. But I have to say there's some prevarication there. I sometimes wonder, but if you're serious about it, fine. I'm up for it too. But William Dalrymple's not. And that's the point. He's not really up for it, because what he says is, and incidentally, I mark your ascension, William, from very, very good travel writer to historian. When my history of conspiracy theories comes out, then I will also make this upward lift as well, and we can sit on a kind of equal plane. But what William Dalrymple said, as Douglas said, was people want to go to New York at the moment because America is the most productive and the richest. It is, as Douglas said, also one of the freest. And he then said, one day it will be China, and therefore this will come to the nub of this point. If we do not consistently uphold the values that we mean by Western values in the world now, the time may very well come when the major champion and the biggest supplier, the biggest economic power and the biggest military power on the globe is not a power that supports and upholds the kinds of values that we do. And in that situation, we will be in danger. So vote for the motion.
So I just want to say, because of that personal attack, if there's time at the end, I will give William Dalrymple a chance to respond. I'm the chairman, and I think that was a little bit loaded up. Charles.
If might be a drink after.
Okay, he'll settle for a drink. That's right.
If and when the Chinese do take over, pray to God that they don't treat us the way we treated the Vietnamese, the Iraqis, the Kenyans, the Algerians. That they don't practice the values that we have imposed on those people. Now, we have wonderful values, but we don't practice them when we're dealing with the third world. And I hope when the Chinese come to that stage of power that we have achieved in the last century, that they don't treat us the way we treated them. That's first. Second, I want to thank Ibn Warraq for being the one person on that side who did not use invective and insult against his opponents. And the gentleman up at the top who said he didn't like the term jaw is better than war. I would like to say that Willie Dalrymple's right. Not enough people read history. It wasn't I who said that. It was Winston Churchill. Thank you.
Right. You can never go wrong in a debate in Britain by quoting Churchill. Ibn Warraq, go ahead.
Well, I think Western civilization is one civilization which is open to others to a far greater extent than any other. The West has indeed learned from the East, and I have long sections in my new book describing what they learned from Iran.
So invective and plugs are on the same ban list.
It is Western scholars, indeed, who unearthed all what we owed to the East. West has one of the great, as I said, one of the great features, one of the great redemptive features of Western civilization is self-criticism. West has reflected on its crimes, has learned from them, and is stronger than ever because of it, because of their self-reflection, their self-criticism. Finally, I do not wish to live in a society where you are stoned for adultery. I prefer to live in a society where we get stoned first and then commit adultery.
That's an absolutely terrific point. We do, and I'm very grateful to for bringing in such a note of good humour towards the end. We're going to get the vote any moment. I see that someone is about to bring it up to the. Is that yes? Perfect timing. There we are. I was just wondering if I might have to waffle for a bit to keep you all amused. So, on the motion, we should not be reluctant to assert the superiority of Western values. Before, it was 313 in favour, 221 against, and 207 don't know. It's now 465 for, 264 against, and only 18 don't know. And if those 18 would like to identify themselves to management, they'll be made to listen to all again. Thank you all very much indeed, and please join me in thanking the panel.